Okay, we'll call to order the city council work session for Wednesday, June 23rd. In approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Yes.
Okay. Essentially, we only have two items. We're discussing the feedback. After that, we'll have a brief update from Jeff about the code audit. So first, we have public comment. There's audience today. That's cool.
Honored.
If you want to speak now, you can.
Take a look, because I'm hungry. I haven't had dinner.
Okay.
Okay. Jim Oyola. Good point. Sam, I have a quick question about, I have some petitions for you folks. I think I have. Close to 27 or 28 different restaurants that have submitted
Okay.
petitions, and that's basically in opposition to a proposed food and beverage tax. But what I would like, should I give this to you, or could I have copies made? That would be good.
If you give it to Jen, she's the recorder.
Okay, great. So, yeah, and I would just like, just for my own records, who,
Do you want me to just email it to you so that?
whatever it's easiest, I just know if you would. Just so you know, in terms of this, there's about 260 signatures. When I put out the petition, I asked just for owners and employees. And so for the most part, some people listened to that, other people didn't. You'll see that some of the restaurants that were a little bit more, let's say, aggressive went to customers. So you'll have a couple of pages. So, but I think just the effect of just the thought of the food and beverage tax, this is a culmination of basically 2 days. So you can take that for what it's worth. I'd like to make this as brief as possible. I know you guys are really busy, but once again, I just feel like all of this seems to be, in spite of this being talked about for 15 months, the direction of where we're all going is we, as the tsunami is going to happen tomorrow. I think that essentially, having grown up here, previous administrations and councils were more inclined to be very conservative in their judgments. So that being said, I didn't come here to assassinate characters, Mark or Dennis, but I do feel like there are some challenges that I have with a lot of their premises. None of them are overwhelming, but in terms of Dennis, he's a likable guy.
But you can't remember my name.
Yeah, right. I thought Dennis the Menace, but
Man, you would.
if you haven't heard that before, have you?
I have.
Okay, I thought so. I don't know. You said before that, your needs of this building in particular, you couldn't drug test here because you had a drug test in the lunchroom where the employees. I thought, well, that's pretty severe. And last time I was here, you were saying the roof is supporting the floor.
For the wall.
The wall is supporting.
A bearing wall is being supported by the roof.
It was welcome to Cannon Beach. It was built on a swamp. You go into the Mariner Market, you get vertigo. We got a counselor here that's helped me over the years support my own buildings. And that's what we live with. And we learn how to fix things. And it's not like all of a sudden you go and even Brandon told me that once you jump from this building to another building, you get into a situation where everything has to come up to code. And years ago, I was pretty much run out of town when I tore down Bill's Tavern. Well, that came from a direct need because Tim Lindsay, the building inspector at the time, said, well, you can't have music anymore. The floors are falling down underneath themselves. And if you put any more than 50% improvement into a building, you have to bring it up to floodplain and put steel girders inside the old builds to make it functional because there was no insulation, there was no roof. You could see through it. So, basically for the last 30 years, I've been the son of a bitch that tore down bills. So there's a legacy here. And, we're all aware that those have heard the Janet Ree case of the world. It's just like, but those councils were, I don't know, very conservative. And because they stuck strictly to the concept of the comprehensive plan, I think that's the direction we all love. I think this building has utility, and it's like when you have a flat tire, you don't buy a new car, you fix the flat tire. So, and Mark, I think your needs are real. I don't think anybody in town is saying that the fire department doesn't need help, doesn't need more volunteers, doesn't need assistance. I feel sad what happened with the girl last week. I think all of us are pretty well woke up for that. But it seems like since you've been here, you've singled out the restaurants as if you want to eat your own. Your problems are our problems. You need 15 people. I figure for all our restaurants, we need 600. And we're not getting them this year. This virus has totally crippled our workforce. People have left because of other reasons. We're not open full time. To come after us at this period of time to me is I don't know if it's right. But I just think what I would like to see is, again, instead of pushing forward so fast with all of this, it's what we used to do, what we've done before and what other communities do. And you guys know what Blue Ribbon committees are all about. I would just love to see, instead of going 5 months forward now with a bond, which quite frankly, I think it's going to lose. It'd be a waste of time for this council. Would be a Blue Ribbon committee with everybody here having a representation, people within the community, the work community, retired people. And we did it for the school issue. We've done it before other communities. I know there have been Blue Ribbon committees and have specific goals, talk about and bring everything down instead of a roar in conversations. So when a decision is made, it doesn't seem like it's being done over the top of everybody's head. The community has a part in it. And at that point, it just seems, well, it's like the old Rolling Stones song. You guys know the lyrics. You can't always get what you want. Well, I don't think everybody here, if there was a Blue Ribbon committee, would get exactly what they wanted. I could sing the lyrics if you want. I'm not ready to do it. But you get what you need. And I think that's what would happen. You would compromise, and you would see there wouldn't be an extreme, but you would get what you need. So that being said, I still think there are other ways to raise money. Bruce, I would contend that there's a lot more parking spaces than 560 parking spaces in this town. I know the city owns Hemlock. I know they have a right of way. My son-in-law took the kids up to Mount Hood when the snow came. He couldn't find a parking spot because it was from Snow to Mount Hood. It was all paid parking. So I think there's flexibility. And one time you and I talked, you were for it. And I know that there are nuances that would be very difficult to implement. But again, within a Blue Ribbon committee, there would be a chance to talk about all these things and it could be aired out. Why? Because I went downtown last week. I counted over 500 spaces downtown. And I know some of it's private, but that private would have to be incorporated into a plan too. Mm-hmm. And my last statement would simply be in terms of levying a property tax. If we have a food and beverage tax and it's costing us another, say, X amount of time and energy to implement it, we're going to figure out how to pay for that. And that's going to be through rising prices a little bit. So say we raise prices. I know everybody has numbers, but I got my own. Say you raise prices 5% on everything you sell, because just to oversteer the fact that now you've got to make change, pennies and dimes and nickels. That's going to take longer. It's going to take longer to I can go on with 15 reasons why this would slow down our production. It's going to cost us. But the math is, if we raise our prices, say 5%. Everybody in town went out to eat 5 times a month at $50 for 2 people. That 5% increase compared to a 5% increase on your property taxes, 2% for the fire district, 3% for 52 separate bonds, I'm sure. But the difference would be on going out 5 times would be $30 in terms of what you would pay. In terms of the increase going to a restaurant versus the increase in your property taxes. I can go over the math because I can do the 0.00738 pretty easily on what assessed values are. If you go out 6 times, it's a wash. So anyway, that's what I got. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Let's see how many hands, oh, some people now.
Sure.
Okay, at this point, I'll ask if there's anybody in the attendees on Zoom who would like to raise their hand and make a comment. Okay, I don't see anybody. That's good. That's fine. They're listening. We will then go straight to our discussion because that was our plan. We've heard some stuff from 2 sides, several sides actually. We've got a lot of letters. So it's time to digest some of that.
Sam, can I ask a question of Jim?
Sure. If Jim's willing.
Do you feel that we've had enough meetings?
I think you've had way too many.
Okay, so you don't feel the restaurant people would take advantage of another meeting?
I don't think so, Rob. It's just, I think we're busy.
Okay,
You know, it's and it feels like oftentimes for me, that if you folks haven't made up your mind from the onset where we're going with this, if you don't see what I'm saying with our restaurant people, it's futile to have another one as to speak the same things over and over.
all right, thank
You know,
you.
it's, you know, I don't think there's anything vague about it. Again, there's a huge wish list out there. Why don't we talk about the wish list a little bit? That's all.
Thank you.
And I think it'd be redundant. It's wasting all our time. I was actually thinking of coming here and telling you stories about my childhood or something and saying, well, you wasted my time lying about something.
I bet it'd be interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, at that point,
Can I read a little something that I put together? I'd like to talk a little about from the district side. A lot comes from conversations recently and I think some misconceptions. So Mayor and Council, thank you for your time this evening. For those of you on Zoom in the audience that don't know me, my name is Mark Reckman. I'm the Fire Chief for Cannon Beach Fire District. I want to spend a few minutes to talk this evening and address the food and beverage proposal, where we came from and where we are. First, I want to start back with the formation of the Fire District. The Fire District was formed in 1947, roughly 10 years before the city was even incorporated. The district was formed to protect the village residents of Cannon Beach from the threat of fire. The district was formed at the time when Cannon Beach was a working class village, not a tourist destination. Somewhere in the 60s, the Arch Cape was annexed into the district. And starting in the late 80s, the scope of Cannon Beach significantly changed with the increase of tourism, decline of the timber and fishing industries. It is now considered a predominantly tourist and retirement community. Over the years, Measure 5 and 50 were implemented and prohibited the tax rate from changing, making the permanent tax rate 35 cents per thousand. This is one of the lowest, if not the lowest, in the state for a fire district. This has placed Cannon Beach in a disadvantage for funding emergency services for tourists. As a special district, the only taxation the district can do is property taxes. The current revenue of the current tax rate does not support the current operational demands. In 1999, the fire district passed a fixed rate levy to hire a fire chief. At that time, recognizing the call volume and workload of the district was becoming too much for a volunteer chief. Shortly thereafter, a training officer was also hired. The fire chief levy is renewed by voters and has been every 5 years. In 2018, it was changed to 19 cents per thousand levy, so it increased with the cost of living and insurance. As early as 2003, the fire district hired a consultant to complete a customer-based strategic plan. One of the relevant recommendations of that plan was to find other revenue sources to support district operations, as it was determined that the tax rate could not sustain operation under that current funding model. Fast forward to May 2019, the budget committee recognized that the revenue was not going to sustain operations. Discussion with the city about tourism tax began. The board of directors decided to put a levy on the ballot in 2020 to support staffing and operations. This levy was never designed to fix the funding issues, but to bring the taxpayer responsibility up to a fair level in the hopes of finding a way towards some tourism responsibility. Since 2019, I've made 5 presentations to the council regarding this. As early as 2020, in early 2021, the council asked me to get feedback from restaurants. And I reached out to the chamber in a meeting on March 4th. It was brought back feedback that I received. One of the questions after that was, how much will this raise? I hired a consultant, a highly recommended consultant and specialized consultant that was experienced in this type of studies. The city of Cannon Beach paid half of those consultant fees. The community problem of funding emergency calls for tourism is not going away. This is a joint problem. Better funding for the fire district better supports the city. A joint functional EOC supports the fire district in a disaster. In 2021, our calls are up almost 40%. I'm going to stop there for a second, stop what I read, but Jim made a very pointed spigot of the water rescue. We have run more water rescues this year than anybody ever remembers. I pulled more people than I care to admit I haven't personally, my rescue swimmers have, out of the ocean. We're doing more high angle rescues than we ever. This isn't any local person, not a single one of them. This is 100% tourism. And tech rescue is one of the most expensive and dangerous things we do. I urge you to please consider implementing the food and beverage tax, either by council or by a vote. Begin in early 2022. The tax begins in January of 22, then let the restaurants have until July to fully implement it. Some are going to have an easier time implementing and may want to implement in a slower spring than waiting until July. Others are going to have a harder time due to hardware and software. They may need more time to upgrade that. Separate reimbursement fund from the first year of proceeds to reimburse those restaurants for their costs if they're forced to purchase new point of sale hardware and upgrades. I'd like to dispel a couple of points of misinformation. I never asked the city for 2% tax. I asked for to implement a 5%, and the original was the percentage. The time, there was no study as to how much it's generate. In the meeting with the restaurants on March 4th, it was suggested by some restaurants that this be implemented 2% and see what it generates. The statement is made that the district's asked for $800,000 a year. This is not a completely accurate statement. What my statement was the difference between the average fire district tax rate for the coast area of $1.37 and the current district of tax rate of 89 cents. The difference between those two is about $800,000. This is operating costs. This is not capital improvement or vehicle replacement. The other questions I've heard lately is, what is the district going to do with the money? The short answer to that is fund operations. There is not a need for a new fire station like there is a city hall. The first priority is a fire marshal, fire prevention officer, getting our fire prevention up and going. The second is getting some kind of advanced life support, hopefully in the way of a staff medics ambulance into Cannon Beach. We are waiting way too long for an ambulance to get into Cannon Beach. And I've been in contact with medics and working at trying to come up with a plan, but it costs money on both sides. Staffing, housing volunteers, some kind of help. We're losing volunteers because they're having to move out because they can't afford housing. And then the last is to support the apparatus replacement plan. Thank you. And I answer any questions.
Thanks, Mark. That's all good points we need to talk about too.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely. Yes.
I'm not trying, it's just about one individual that we know that was, he rents from us. He's a naturopathic doctor. He's 48 years old. He's just coming to town. He lives in Falcon Cove. He volunteered for the fire department a while ago and he was denied. He's a surfer. He carries around with him ocean rescue equipment. He thought he nailed the interview and he said it was never explained to him why he was denied the position.
I am not going to get into that personal in the middle of a.
Okay, I just was curious because you're talking about needs for people and they seem totally qualified.
I understand. There was. Yeah, I'm not going to get into that in the middle.
That's fine. I just wondered if it had been brought up.
Offline, I'd be happy to.
Oh, no, that'd be fine. But I think he would like a phone call to know because he was very upset. Right? He loves this community. And he moved his practice from Portland. So
Okay.
Okay, council. I think one of the things, I'll just start and throw out a little, I guess, some fodder to talk about. One of the things that I think has driven this the most since its first time we talked about it, which was a couple of years ago, actually, or a year and a half ago, we did not continue with the discussion, and then pandemic hit, and then other things. So that's where this kind of goes along. But the whole idea that there was finally some source that was discovered, sort of, that will draw from the tourists, not just the residents, not just the property owners, and not in that sense that we, as the residents of Cannon Beach, are paying for the 1,700 residents. That's generally around what the census says lives here in Cannon Beach. Not all of them are property owners and not all of them are voters, but that's the census. But that idea that they cover all these folks that come and visit us through the emergency services, not only the emergency services, but also some of the services that the city provides, like the restaurants, like the restrooms, which are expensive. They're not terrible, but they're expensive. And our own police department and the lifeguard, those kinds of things. So there are services that we provide that if we were just a normal town of 1,700 folks without any tourism, we'd be skating by. Actually, we wouldn't, because we wouldn't have the room taxes, which are really covering the general operations of city. The other thing, and this was something that you brought up, and you made, Jim. I wrote it down, but I can't find it. Sorry. The old councils in the past. I agree. I think you're very spot on by the fact that a lot of the past councils were very conservative about doing things that probably should have been done. That is why we're kind of running into the lifespan of our public works in several instances. We've got some some plumbing that desperately needs attention. Yes, it probably could cripple along for a while, but it also does need some attention before it blows up, which is a possibility, and it has in a couple cases. So the city does run into a situation where a little extra funding is important to have. And before it actually gets even more expensive, as far as I understand, is that it's better to fix it now than fix it after it's broken. So those are just comments. I'm not saying I'm 100% behind this yet. I'm still very much on the fence. I'm hearing a lot of good comments from both sides. Especially in the letters. The letters have been very succinct. We've only had one that I've seen that was kind of had a little vitriol in it. It's okay. But most, I'm surprised at most people, there is some, actually, there's quite a bit of misinformation. As much as Mark keeps trying to clarify things, I still hear the same certain letters coming up. They're saying something, it's not quite right, but they're getting closer. So I don't know. I'm not trying to pick a point. I'm trying to draw in some conversation. So I will shut up and let somebody else go.
I think we've heard, I know during the coffee with the counselors, we heard quite a bit of support for we had a lot of people, relatively speaking, for our coffee with the counselors, and we had quite a bit of support for tax. And requests that the council make the decision, that it doesn't go to a vote. They appreciated the split between the fire district and the city. So I think that there is support out there. I know the restaurants are very unhappy about the idea, with good reason. There are some good reasons for it. I would like to see us make the decision to support the food and beverage tax. Split it, of course, between the city and the fire district, and make it effective July 1st of 2022.
Well, and one of the things that I still think is confusing is we call it a food and beverage tax. However, I've heard from Ashley, it's a prepared food tax. And I really appreciated Patrick Nofield's letter that we received today. I hope you all read it. Did you?
Didn't see it.
Oh, okay, because he talked about a community-wide sales tax would be more equitable.
Paul Nofield, yeah.
Also talked about the margin of profit that a restaurant has is between 3% and 5%. And that a lot of restaurants go out of business in their first year because it's so tight and difficult. He talked about 25 to 35% that the hotels have brought forward this year. And he was curious about where that $1 million that we did receive for taxes had gone, and was suggesting that in the next year and a half, when we receive, because he anticipates that it's going to continue to be in a good spot, that we would put that money towards improvements or City Hall. I thought that was really good suggestion. Instead of, I think we need as a city to be putting more money towards what we're saying we want to have here. And also he suggested that we slow down and get this right. I do feel that Jim's correct, that a blue ribbon committee would be an excellent suggestion because we really haven't been able to hear from the people as well as I'd like to see that happen. So I guess those are my thoughts.
I don't know, did you allude to $1 million tax? What $1 million are we
We've
talking?
received about $1 million in hotel motel taxes.
Beyond what we budgeted.
Yes,
And we
That we-
budgeted very, very conservatively because we didn't know. if we had
Correct.
any tax money at all.
right, but we've got it.
And
So,
we used it for all those things that got put off for a year and a half.
well, but we're going to be getting some more. So why don't we look at the future and how we could benefit in showing the public that we believe in what we're wanting to see happen.
The one issue, and I think Bruce has tried his best to lay this out, is that when it's the lodging tax, it's pretty easy to show where it goes. I mean, that's what the budget does. But the 70% goes to marketing.
Marketing, correct.
So we're only talking about 30%.
Mhm.
And that 30% is in our general fund. And so our general fund gets divvied up into all the little things that it gets divvied up. If we were to designate or all that, pigeonhole certain things from that, that's what we could do. Just remember that it's not the full amount, it's just a portion of it. The other one is, and we need to do some research on the idea of a community-wide sales tax. Vail tried this 3 years ago. And we need to follow up and do some, yes, Ashley or Emily, if they could figure out a way, but it didn't work because the state pounced on them and said, you can't do a sales tax. That's where the sales tax has some sort of statewide thing that says we can't do that. That's why this was the only one that seemed to have an opening that was available. And this, I mean, the food and beverage tax.
Mr. Mayor, we have asked Emily that question about sales tax versus food and beverage. And Robin, you're correct. We started out with food and beverage. And then we thought, well, maybe in order to make sure we're not doing total sales, we take off beverage. And so then it was just a food and then it was a prepared food. But I don't think we've landed any place yet, but the documents that are being put together now refer to a prepared food.
Okay,
We're not considering beverages at this time.
yeah,
But that's-
I think that's a good way to go, is to be a specific.
But food and beverage hasn't been pulled out of everything yet. But if you'd like, I know that Emily gave me a great explanation on the difficulty with the implementation of both. So, I mean, we might be able to get that answer tonight if you want.
There she is.
Well, he's here. Shall we unmute her and see if she can still answer that question?
Hi, council. Yes, thank you for having me. So the problem with a citywide sales tax is that you do run up against the corporate activities tax that we talked about in the past. It's difficult to avoid that when it crosses industries. So it's difficult to craft carve outs to avoid the corporate activities tax, which is based on, which is preempted by state law and based on gross receipts of a business. And the prepared food tax is not. It's a tax paid by the consumer on one part of the business's business, I guess, service related business. And so if you go industry, if you cross industries, say from clothing to restaurants to, you know, any other type of industry services, it's harder to craft those carve outs. Having said that, I mean, I think it's something that Ashley and I can explore if that's the direction the council wants to go in. We can explore it more, but it is more difficult to avoid the preemption in the corporate activities tax.
It's a lot harder than just trying to figure out what happens to a donut.
Right.
Remember that conversation?
Yeah, okay, so thank you, Emily.
I had one more question for Emily, if I
Oh,
could.
sure, shoot.
Emily, at our coffee with the counselors, we were talking about when it would be appropriate for Bruce to be pushing these taxes and when, at what time he might need to step back and allow. Did you find an answer for that?
I did, and I sent an email, but I can recap it real briefly here. If the council decides to refer the tax to the voters, then our recommendation is that all city employees besides the council cease any advocacy either way when you pass that resolution.
Okay.
And how do you define advocacy?
So that's defined in the state ethics laws, and public employees cannot promote or oppose political causes while on the job during working hours. And there's a lot of factors that go into it. And I can certainly tell you, obviously, a city employee cannot say, yes, please vote yes on X, Y, or Z. You can provide information, but even providing information can be viewed as advocacy. If, for example, an employee were to talk only about the money gained from a certain measure, but not the cost, that is considered advocacy. So there's a lot of factors that go into play that we can talk about if that time approaches.
Perfect. Thank you. More clarity. Okay.
Thanks, Emily.
You're welcome.
I think the parking as a fundraising potential is always out there. We've talked about that before we even talked about this. And the thing is that it is complex on to figure out how. It's not like putting coins in a machine anymore. It's pretty complex. And we don't want parking meters or I don't want parking meters all over everywhere. That said, there are probably high-tech ways that we can sort it out. The issue is how much and what sort of revenue stream that would be. We don't know, literally. That's going to take a lot of analysis. Parking numbers, parking spaces, what would it do? One of the discussions, we had a traffic study a long time ago. We're having a new one right now. Please, I don't know, was survey done?
25th, right?
Survey till the 25th, please go look at the survey, answer some questions. Anyhow, the parking study that folks have been doing will give us some clarity on how many and where they are. The past study kind of had some insight on the fact that if we had paid parking downtown, people are just going to start parking more in Midtown or more in the presidentials or literally out on the highway. That's other concerns. Everything we do has this domino effect of other stuff happening. Part of the game, I guess. So parking, yes, it is still in the mix, actually. So we will talk about that more. I'm looking at Patrick's letter right now. I'm just trying to follow through some of the stuff that he said.
One thing that I'd like to to have explained a little bit better was, I think Emily alluded to it, but as to why exactly we can't craft a tax that carves out certain portions of a business transaction with other stores, like we're doing with the proposal for restaurants.
Well, I think what she was saying is as soon as you jump industries, goes under the corporate tax. So even if there is, I couldn't even think of a way to carve it out, but if it's just gift items from any store, you've got galleries, you've got gift shops, you've got restaurants with gifts, you've got
T-shirt shops.
t-shirt shops.
Yeah, clothes.
Is that a gift? How do you define it? You know, it gets kind of complex. Yeah, again, you've got that cross-industry aspect that is defined in that one state ordinance.
You have to carve something out of each one of those types of businesses to stay away from violating the,
It's not enough to just take a percentage.
That becomes something off of the gross, which is absolutely not allowed.
that you can't tax the total receipts. I don't know if the percentage makes a difference. That'd be a Emily question. For Emily.
Yeah, hi. So the corporate activities tax is a tax based on the gross receipts. So once you look at the gross receipts, even if you take a percentage, then it's preempted. The state legislature has said that's not allowed. Cities and counties and districts cannot do that.
So it's still based on the total, even if you take a portion off,
Correct.
basing it on what they said you can't base it on.
I see.
It's a good question because I didn't get it either.
I still don't, but I accept what you're saying, Emily.
I think that's what happened in Vail, is they just wanted to do it on a portion of all sales because most of their clientele were coming from Idaho, which has a tax. They were just coming to Vail in order to get stuff that wasn't taxed. And so, and that's talked about in a lot of border town type areas. So I don't know. The other issue that really concerns me, and we have not, and Mark kind of alluded to it a little bit, is the point of sale problem. I know of one, maybe two restaurants in town that don't have a computerized point of sale. So that means there's a major expense. Again, that's ranging because we get different people telling us different amounts of what the expenses are. In order to set that up, and that becomes a personal problem because if this tax was just on galleries, bringing it to my door, I don't have a computerized point of sale system. I don't want one. I wouldn't want to ever. I want to learn how to use one. So in that sense, I can really understand the folks that don't want to try and do that. Adapting it from what they already have, that's a learning curve. I understand, and that's an expense. So, that one becomes the real issue for me. More than some of the others. And I also have noted in a lot of the letters that people are really concerned about. It's very obvious what the fire department wants to do with the funding operations. Pretty straightforward. City, we keep batting them around all kinds of ideas. So it is kind of vague. The city hall project and the new police station project seems to be top on the list, but they don't know what that is. We have not had a good record on figuring that out ourselves. So
Yeah, location.
that
cost.
is an issue.
I think the location is difficult. I think all the information as far as what would go into the structure is incorporated in 3 pages in the report. it lists every single space, how many square feet, it occupies now. So there's all this information, and it's a matter of just saying, do we need one conference room or two conference rooms in police? That's the sort of discussion as far as what should be in City Hall, and is it too big or is it too small? Because if you look at the space and you take out some, it'll be smaller. If you say, no, they should have all those, it stays the same. But it's on 2 or 3 pages.
And we need to go through that exercise before we submit anything for this.
Yes, I mean, we should.
And before we do, we need 2 things. One is affirm our space requirements. It's going to be utilized. We've got a really good handle on that. We haven't gone through department by department. The consultants did, but we as a council have not gone through with staff and said, things have changed. Or what do we need to do now? And before a design can be done, we need to know where it's going to be. And we have yet to get any agreement on it. So
I think we can.
the Blue Ribbon Committee we had confirmed and affirmed the validity of the SRG's study and evaluation for the programming. And through that process, I believe they affirmed the need for a City Hall and Police Department. So those have been done. We've done the program to determine what our space requirements are. We need to fine tune it. Determined, and with the Blue Ribbon Committee, that there's a need for a City Hall, Police Department, and evaluation been made by local contractors and architects that this building would be throwing good money after bad if we spend any money on it. So
You actually have that report from David Veneta.
yeah,
And I think that if we were to sit down with those 3 pages with you or with a committee, outside time it would take would be 2 hours. Now, the citing thing is completely different, but it literally is, this is the size of the chief's office. This is how big it is now. This is what's proposed. Here's the difference between the two. And you say yes to the chief's office, no to the amount of space it is. And at that point, it's simply an arithmetic exercise. And then you factor the cost per square foot into what your total is.
I think the council has not done a good job of explaining the needs to replace City Hall and the Police Department. I think I'm in full agreement of the council with staff, but we certainly spend a lot of time and effort coming up with what our needs are. And if we don't move forward, just all this effort for the last 2 years, it's not just been, it didn't just suddenly happen. I've been here 17 years, and this council, not this council, councils have talked about the need for a city hall ever since I've lived here. And it didn't just suddenly happen and put off the maintenance. Well, maintenance, they've been doing what they can and replaced every time they get into a wall. It turns out not to be a $1,400 job, more like a $14,000 job to when they find out what's under there. Particularly, I think about the kitchen and restroom is a disaster. And even now the floors are cracking. Tile is splitting apart because the building is sinking. And yes, that's the way it is here. But just like Bill's, they took care of it. We need to take care of it. And until we can say where it's going to be, there's not a whole lot more we can do. But it would point out that the square, people talk about, oh, that's too big. The current facilities are too small, and they're about 11,000 square feet. Police department should be almost double. Well, it should be double what it is.
Yeah.
So there's 1,500 feet right there, just to make it a decent place, for people to work and perform the duties that are required of a police force.
And when you're working with a program, you work with the space inside the wall. So that's how big the chief or the deputy chief's office is going to be. Then after that, you have to factor in a grossing factor because you're going to need hallways. There's the thickness to the walls, all these other factors. And so it increases about 50%, 45, 50% over that. So like the 1,000 or the 1,500 square feet that it comes up just in raw numbers, the police department needs to increase, goes out to about 2,700 square foot when you put hallways and ventilation and things like that in it. So you got to go and start and work your way through the whole thing. But that's how the space works.
The whole need and process of what the city portion of a potential food and beverage food tax would be is part of this discussion.
Mhm.
I agree. But also, if it can be presented well enough, it should also succeed with the property bond. So the whole idea that
Should also what?
succeed. It should pass. If the need is presented and understood and everybody agrees the need is there, it should also pass as a property tax. So I guess I'm trying to bring us back to what we're talking about, even though this is a big portion of that. What we present as the city's portion has to be presented really well and understandably so that folks, if we go to a vote, which would be my preference, because I think this is a tax on businesses within our community upon our visitors is a citywide decision. It's not a council decision as far as I'm concerned. So in order to do that, we need to lay out a presentation similar to what Mark has done, even better, so that everybody understands what is going on. And what we're asking for. So,
And that material is all ready to go.
yeah, we've got material all over the place and we've talked about it for years. But our problem is just community doesn't listen. We sit here night after, well, not night after night, but month after month, almost week after week, talking about issues. An example would be is we've got a transportation plan. I'm going to push it again, that we have tried for 7 years, 5 years. I don't know how many times we tried for transportation. We got the grant. Now we've got the good people actually doing it. They're out walking around measuring things. And they're asking for input from the citizens. How many did we get so far, Jeff?
Last Monday, we had 75.
Good. That's better than the 6 we had last week. So
I would hope that we're over 100.
good. That helps. Last week it was only 6, and I think we really pushed the second effort out and got some more. So that said, it is very hard. We talk about stuff all the time. And then we go on the street and people go, why haven't we heard about this? Well, gotta act on the other side. This is a partnership. We talk about it, it's public. Rusty's doing a hell of a job getting it on the computer so people can find it. We record everything. So that's a little pet peeve.
Sam,
My soapbox.
it's not unusual for a community not to be listening to the city council. I mean, I've covered many, many communities as a reporter and had a real newspaper,
Yeah.
doing real news stories week after week or day after day on an issue. And you constantly hear people say, well, I never heard about that. Why didn't you write anything about it? So Cannon Beach is not unusual in that respect.
And COVID has really messed it up.
Well, it's universal.
That was before
Universal
COVID too. Actually, COVID had a different, because it really sparked our technology
Mhm.
so that we could get it out a little differently in different methods. Anyhow, okay. What else do we have?
I'd like to address something that Jim had said. And Jim, if we have a Blue Ribbon community or committee, I hope you can find time to be on it. I would like for you to be on it. Yeah.
I would ask, I just only have one more comment. I think we're going to take off. And I know that you have the power to enact this just by your own voters, Nancy indicated. And to me and you folks are considered to be representatives of our community. But I would think that if you just decided on your own to go forward with this, that would be basically taxation without representation. And I think we've gone through this in the last federal administration for 4 years of trying to hide what we're doing. And I don't want to see that happen with this council. That's all.
Thanks, Jim.
Question on that. Taxation without representation, the people being taxed really don't have representation no matter what we do. They won't be voting.
Well, no, I would hope that we would. I don't mind going to a vote. I'm asking,
No, but that's not the people that are being taxed.
Customers are being
the
taxed.
people voting would be people who live within the district and are eligible to vote, wouldn't that be?
Right.
Is that how it works? So they're taxpayers, I would assume, unless they could be renting, but whoever the landlord is going to be charging under them, increased rents for that tax.
That's true
You're
of
talking
the
about two different
property tax. I'm talking about a
Property tax.
food and beverage tax.
That against why I think property tax should be in the discussion too, because I think it's very viable. I pay $42,000 a year in property taxes. Only $7,000 of that is from my own household. I have no problem with, I can write off the taxes that apply to my business as an expense. So I figured I'd be paying another $25,000. Some of that I'm going to write off. I would love to pay that versus having to have the food and beverage tax and have the stigma of that applied to our restaurants in town. We're one of the 3 cities in Oregon, which is traditionally a non-sales tax state. And you people have told me, said, well, Brandon has said, I'm used to a sales tax that came from Washington. Well, I encountered that when we had a long discussion. And people, all my experience in town, you can't believe how many people said, we love Oregon because there's no sales tax. So, I'm not here throwing out, it's easy for me to come and pontificate. But I think people on the street are pontificating, and you need to edify everything you're doing. And Nancy, maybe it's true that people don't pay attention. Well, quite frankly, you've got the attention of people now. Those ballots have to be significant or something. The petitions, and that was 2 days, 260 some signatures. People are paying attention. If you're being stopped by a cop long enough speeding, you're going to pay attention. But if you talk about it long enough, so I think the idea is simple communication, whether it's Blue Ribbon, but it is, like you say, I think you guys are on the right track. I think Mike's getting pretty close. But talk on the street is everything this council has done has been behind closed doors. Obviously, COVID has been the reason for that. But there's been very little edification in terms of, it bothers me that my wife and I are the only ones here, but I know how busy these restaurants are now. And thank God we've finally been able to get staff. I think I was the only entity in town that got the last PPP input of money, and it was substantial. Thank God for the Small Business Administration. But the only reason I got it was because I was a veteran. And it was very discriminatory, but I'm not going to complain. I gave 4 years of my life to the Navy, so hey, big deal. I can survive. But so many restaurants are in that position now, and this is a burden. But the more communication you have, the better. All I'm saying is, I don't think you should decide on your own to do this. This would be your legacy.
Well, one thing that I'm concerned about is that you as a business owner could write off property taxes increase. There's a lot of residents around here that couldn't afford it, much less write it off.
We also have the Oregon tax on our gross sales too, on top of that, which just enacted in the last couple of years. So it's not like we're eliminating taxes and everything else. Our gross sales in our restaurant business are pretty substantial. Our profit margin is not. That's unfair.
Yeah, well, I'm worried about residents who couldn't afford the school tax, and then now they've got the school property taxes. And if we raise up the property taxes for residents here,
Again, I would counter that. We're going to raise our prices if you go out to eat. It sort of mitigates itself. Unless you don't want to eat in town, and I hope you guys go out to eat in restaurants because we need you.
Certainly don't go 5 or 6 times a month.
no.
Well,
In your example.
no, we have a lot of people that 5, 6 times a day, too bad. They're here. They like tired of them. But anyway, that's here or there.
It does bring up a point of discussion that we need to make is Blue Ribbon Committee idea. Do you feel like we should do that, or do we think, I don't know, how would that work? Would we ask them?
When we were talking about having had one already, that was more about the city hall
Yeah.
and the police station. This would be about the restaurant tax. So I think they're related a little, but I'd sure love to see that myself.
I have no problem with it, Bruce.
I guess I misunderstood. I was thinking that the Blue Ribbon Committee would be for the city hall questions or whatever, but it could be for both. But what I would advocate that because that's kind of hanging there as to whether, if the city does move forward with it, what would the city do? And city hall proposal is too big. I don't know if anybody's ever looked at the numbers, but I would ask that you do have somebody, a group, that if you are going to get to the point where you may advocate for a city hall, which hasn't happened yet, but if you are going to reach that point, that somebody does spend time looking at the 3 pages, especially if it's yourselves. But if you have somebody else do it, but we've got to get to the point that if there's any consideration for paying the debt service with the food and beverage tax, or even with the property tax, we have to be able to answer the question, is it too big, is it not? And the information is readily available. Why we need the city hall is readily available. And it's not because we don't keep fixing this building. It's because if anything bad was to happen, like a 6.0 or something in the neighborhood, then if we were in this building, we would be terrible. This would be New Orleans for the first 14 days.
No, I recognize that.
Yeah, that's the problem.
I'm not saying that we don't need a new city hall. All I'm saying is that one of the plans I've seen and heard are, they're ideal, and you always want the ideals moving forward. And I'm just wondering if there's, in terms of, like I think you said last time, instead of a Tesla, this could be sort of a Chevrolet thing in terms of what the city can afford. So these numbers which come out, especially with building costs escalating to the point, every time I built a building, whatever you imagine it costs would be, you add 20%. And lumber prices finally have stabilized. We don't know where they're going or what's going to happen.
Right.
But
But we're up probably about $1 million more than we were when we had all the information.
right, and you saw what happened with the school district in terms of all of a sudden they need a new roof on the middle school.
All right.
And boom, there goes a couple $100,000 more than that for the new roof. So these things happen, and then you can't. There's no I don't know if there's any contingency funds and proposals for that, which would happen regardless. But no, I'm not. I just I feel you folks, your hearts are in the right place. It's just like we need to make sure that we're all sort of on the same page and compromising. I'm not saying compromise. I think more communication would be really wonderful.
And it is a Chevy.
Yeah.
It's not a Tesla.
I think also, what I was gathering, not just from Jim's comments or Pat's comments, but a couple other folks have mentioned in their letters, about a blue ribbon committee. My thought was looking at it more as asking them to be fresh eyes on the different options of fundraising. So, and we've got a pretty good presentation, but they would just be a fresh eyes to say, okay, and maybe they would come up with something a little different. But just to clarify so that we had a little wider vision with detail. If we can't get all the details out to the folks, we bring in some of the folks to do a study of what is the difference between pay, parking, community or property taxes, community-wide sales tax, those topics, and just really look at those, I guess that's what I was thinking.
I think the problem right now with putting together a blue ribbon committee is we don't know what we want them to, what kind of funding we need. We know what kind of funding we would need for debt service for the city hall. But is that the figure we're going to say, please try to come up with funds to pay that debt service? Or what are we going, what is it we're going to ask them to do? We don't have any specifics right now on what we want. I would like to see the money the tax go to fund the city, a new city hall. But we haven't come to a consensus on that yet. So if we develop a blue ribbon committee, what are we really going to ask them to do in terms of finding funds for what and how much? Can you find $800,000 in funding for us to pay debt service per year for a city hall? Or can you find X amount of money for us to pay for X objects? So I don't know that we have a specific that we can ask them to do.
Yeah, and I guess I was thinking a little differently, actually. That's what I do. Finding funds is different than determining what is the best source of funds.
But I think in order to find a best source of funding, you have to know what it is you're trying to fund, because there might be one source that's better for funding a certain thing than another source.
Yeah, that fits.
And I would say that pretty much all that information already exists. I don't think there's a magic bullet out there that we haven't looked at.
I think you're right. And we have a lot of information about the city hall, but if there's, for some reason, there's something else that we wanted to fund with that money, we don't have that much information probably on whatever that other thing might be.
And we don't have that much information about how much money that might be.
Right.
But I think that there are opportunities. I think that, for example, I was talking to some folks about trying to become more of a standard for, environmental impacts, those kind of things. And that we have the opportunity with the school project to possibly do solar for electric, those kind of things. But you're going to have to fund those up front. Maybe those funds could be used for that if there were additional funds. But so I think that there are things, we've got a parks plan that we've never funded.
But we're really looking, the way this conversation got started was, how do we, if we want a new city hall, we need a new city hall. How are we going to fund it? Well, property taxes. We could go for a general bond. And then we thought, well, possibly the food tax would be good because we wouldn't have to go to property taxes to pay the debt service if we used a food tax. We haven't really talked about all these other potentials, not that I want to, because I really think we need to keep our eye on the ball and say the food tax needs to go to fund the debt service in City Hall. And we need a new City Hall. Now, we have a general idea what that debt service would be. We haven't come up with specifics on where the City Hall is going to be or exactly what size, although we have a range of, a pretty good ballpark on the size. So we know what that tax would go for. Do we need a blue ribbon committee to develop more funding sources when we've already looked at parking, we've already looked at property taxes. What else? What else is there?
TLT,
Excuse me?
TLT we looked at.
See,
was
and
9%.
lodging taxes, unless you want to raise your lodging taxes.
Everybody in their comments says there's got to be a better way.
Could I add one more thing, Mike? I'm sorry.
Sure.
I'm gonna talk.
Especially if you have a better way, I'd love to hear it.
All I'm saying is that the points are all well taken, but because of the vagaries that you're speaking of, you have to understand that a food and beverage tax is also, there's so many variables as to what that income would be. Sam and I know from having grown up here that you can have a summer where you have 3 weeks of sun. And I know that I can show you my books and I can go to a calendar and show you the years when we've had major participation and our gross sales are down 30%. It's a reality. And especially in the summertime, we don't have good weather in the summertime. I know Mark talks about, it will reflect on the income you will get from that sales tax. And this is unpredictable along with I'm trying to anticipate what things are going to cost. So in terms of a predictable fund, that's why I think a property tax, boom, you know what it's going to be, bam. You can at least plan on what you're getting from that. But I guarantee food and beverage, and who knows if another partial pandemic comes along. We were closed for 5 months, been operating at 25% all year. If that would have happened, and you next year say you would have had this into effect and had all your contractors in place, this city would be bankrupt.
Well, that concerns me too, that if we depend on a variable cash flow to cover a firm debt obligation. So one reason I had suggested implementing this, get a couple of years experience and a cushion before we actually start the expenditures. And that's probably the way it would happen anyway. If we initiated it in 6 months or whatever, a year, by the time we get the designs done, the bids out and acquired, well, not acquired, we have the land. We should have had a couple of years of actual revenues to know where we are. And then we have to say, okay, how are we going to budget the shortfall if there's a shortfall? So, yeah, there's all these moving parts.
No, I agree with you. And I think you guys have a lot of work to do, but I hope you don't rush to, and I even say, there's reasons why the Blue Ribbon Committee might be redundant, but the questions you have should be probably on the top of the list of the Blue Ribbon Committee. And, if you're having a hard time with it, let's have some more people, maybe there's strength in numbers. And we all should be involved. And again, whatever happens is I'm willing to compromise as long as people in this community have a voice in it. If it's going to be a food and beverage tax, please put it on the ballot. And then we can talk individually and see, people can be their advocates in their own way if they want to be. But I think, I don't want to see the community split in terms of being able to get something done.
And I think that's the point of the Blue Ribbon to me, is they are not creating new work. They're doing kind of what the previous Blue Ribbon did with the architectural firm and just confirm and vet the fact that we need a new city hall. So
I'm sorry.
if the Blue Ribbon Committee for a food and beverage or a funding source was just, they have looked at all the information we already have and just said, okay, the city council is either right on the right track or not on the right track. Because it sounds if there are people out in the streets that don't really understand what we're doing, and that sense of having an in-between partner of a Blue Ribbon Committee to just keep going and vet what we're talking about.
So I think that, I agree with what you're saying. We've been talking about food and beverage tax for I don't know how long, way before me. Same thing with City Hall. If there is any intent to have an election on November 6th, I think is the date, we have to have a ballot question to the supervisor elections, and I think it's down to 7 weeks now. So if we were to have, you wanted a blue ribbon committee to look at City Hall, I think the first one did say, yes, for the City Hall, but we can go ahead and we can explore that again. But then I think that they should focus on the size and, should this go in, should this not go in? That's a meeting. That can be done probably in a meeting. I think if you have somebody come in and provide the information that you've already generated as far as funding sources, and you give it to them in advance and say, this is what we're looking at. And if you've got something else that we can research, let us know. But it looks like these are the tools, and they can say, well, no, I think those are the tools. I like this one best, or however they want to do it. But I think that's a meeting. So I think that if we were to be able to go ahead, or you were be able to make the appointments and then try to get the results of that, I think you could still make the August 13th. If we don't, and then we won't have a referral in November. And I'm not sure if it will be possible. I think that there will be people who will try to go ahead and close this gap. And so maybe we won't be able to do it later. That's because I'm paranoid. But if we're talking about an election, we can do it November 6th. We talk about blue ribbon committees. It's really limited to what they, the questions we can ask them. And then, to get their opinion. So, I mean, if you get appointing, we can go ahead and have those happen. And then people can hear from the blue ribbon committees. But we still have a hard date of August 13th.
Could I say one more thing? Bruce?
I mean, ask them.
I think the August date wouldn't be effective for a blue ribbon committee, because a lot of the people that would be in the business district are in the middle of our season.
Mhm.
And I would think that the next 6 months later, that if the city will acquiesce and say, well, let's have this discussion, knowing that next ballot period, we could discuss that period and then be effective through the fall months. Committee, people have a chance to you're going to get a lot more. You're going to have a lot more people volunteering, including myself. Because on half the time I'm going to Portland picking up J1 students from Ecuador and the Dominican Republic, so we can get open.
Yeah,
these things happen, and things that happen to me happen all the time. When you got 3 restaurants, I may have a plan to go to a blue ribbon committee, and bam,
sure.
My boiler breaks down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the timing would be bad to try to expedite that in a brief period of time.
And my only concern is that if somebody manages to close this on the cat tax, and say, well, no, you can't, then there's no point for having a discussion about a food and beverage, because it'll be precluded.
The one thing that, and I asked this before on some meeting, if we were to go ahead for a November ballot, we could still, at any point prior to that November ballot, cancel it.
Yeah.
So if the Blue Ribbon Committee was to roll on through August into September, maybe even October, we could still say, oops, not a good thing, but we're going to cancel the ballot. That's a second decision, but it allows us to have the timing that Bruce is concerned about, the forward momentum that we all kind of feel like needs to happen for the vote, and then still have plenty of time for discussion to the merit of the vote, merit of the ballot.
And also the August 13th, and if Emily wants to weigh in, but we don't have to have a whole bunch of stuff. It's just the ballot question is what has to be there. It has to be, worked through the Secretary of State and our attorneys and all that. So it's a ballot question. And then there's all these other things can happen behind, as far as, committees and all. It would probably be written around a prepared food language. But if it doesn't, if we find that there is another silver bullet or something, then we can cancel, like you said.
We should find out when the ballot pamphlet goes out and when there's a deadline for that. That would be the date, I think.
Sure, but I mean, but we have to meet the 13th to get on the pamphlet.
13th is just for the question.
Yeah.
That is, yes, it's a commitment for the votes, but again, we can always cancel.
Yeah, but that's your last date to get on the.
Okay.
If it's your placeholder.
The Blue Ribbon Committee again is to me a valid discussion. It's just how we ask the questions of them, of what we want them to do, and that may take some discussion. But it does make it seem like that's the appearance of more community involvement.
Mhm.
And I know people are busy. I'm crazy busy. So that's what it is. But it does give us a little more time.
I don't know if there's any support other than just myself, but it's an idea I've had, is that the more we discuss this, the less certain I feel like we're backing up our ask for our portion of the prepared foods tax. One thing that I see as certain and seems to have wide support is for the fire department. I would really be willing to move forward with a prepared food tax that just went to the fire department at this time. I know our need is not going away.
Yeah.
But I see of the two needs, the fire department being one that has more support, but is also more dire.
If I may,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Well, I disagree with that. I think Mark's done a great job of selling his needs, justifying his needs, explaining them much better than the city has done on explaining its rationale and its needs. But with the time we have left, we can do that. And I think it makes a lot of sense to put them both on the ballot because they're both going to be from the same source of revenues. And I'm reluctant to 2% this year, next year, another 2%, 3%. It's like you just one after the other. I'd rather do it in one bite and let the people vote and say, let's say the whole thing fails. Then you come back and take a look, well, why did it fail? I don't think it would fail. When the alternative is explained that it's property taxes. And the city and the fire department's needs don't go away. And part of me says, I'm a little concerned with the city taking responsibility for a special service district financial needs. They're separate. It's a separate entity. And yes, they have a need and the city can raise these taxes. But are there not other entities that have a need and come and say, well, boy, you need that too. You can't just keep raising the taxes on consumers in Cannon Beach to support an agency that's not part of Cannon Beach. So I understand doing them together. I just have a hard time. It almost looks like divide and conquer to me. So I would disagree with that.
You bring up some real fair point. It's like I said, it may be my idea alone. I just wanted to express it.
Well, I'm concerned that it's easy to see the fire department's needs every 5 years. They come out and hit us again. We need it. We need it. We need it. And it's been constant. City's not done that. City's budgeted and had a source of income, but it has not put money aside in the last 70 years. Somebody said, well, 70 years ago, you knew this was going to happen. Well, every budget, you start cutting just to what your basic requirements are. If we put them all on the ballot together, with the alternative being property taxes, I think it makes sense to do them now. Our needs are just as urgent as the fire department. It's just a little harder to see, and it's a longer term because it's long-term capital improvement. And we have to do the design and contracting and get that going. It's not just for operations. So it's a little more difficult to, I think we need to explain that and get over this idea that you can just come in and fix this building up. That terrible use of money.
Well, that I'm in complete agreement with you.
So we both have a need. We have a need to,
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks a lot.
need to raise the funds for both entities. And I think it's clever use of food and beverage tax revenues to cover public safety services. And that means police and fire and public service. And I think it also makes a lot of sense to put that burden. It's not on the restaurants. I disagree with most of these arguments. It's on the consumer of those services. And right now, a big bulk of those consumers are not paying any service fee. So this is a way, everybody's complained about the day trippers in particular. All the costs we have, whether it's restrooms, cleaning the streets, making the town look nice, and spending 70% of the tourist dollars to bring more people here, and we're not getting anything back. They're not paying anything. So this is the consumer of that entertainment, that pleasure, that fun of coming to Cannon Beach. We can't put a ticket gate at the front door, but we can exercise a food and beverage tax on the consumption of those products that they enjoy by coming here. And if we don't do that, or we just do it just enough, we don't know what the fire department needs. Mark just said that was just based on the average of other fire departments. And I haven't seen that this is what we need. We kind of said, well, 2%, get it. But I've seen our budget and I've seen our projected costs. I haven't seen the fire department's budget and projected costs. And yet we're willing to, Brandon's position, we're willing to take all the flack of going out with a food and beverage tax. We take all the abuse in the city council to support somebody in a separate district, separate government entity. Sure.
With all due respect, I disagree with that statement because I have taken a ton of flack and a ton of horrible emails and comments. I would respectfully disagree with you with that.
Okay, well, I accept that. I guess I just feel it's personal, and I don't get the letters that come to you. I get the letters that come to all the council and the city. So there are people unhappy with it, but I'm finding it's a very small group that's really unhappy with it.
It is.
Getting a lot of support from what I would call the citizens of this town. And that's why I think if we go out together, it will pass.
Can I just break this for a second and take a 5-minute break?
Sure.
So everybody, 5 minutes, and then we'll get right back on the same topic. Everybody just had to take a short break, so we're back and we're going to continue our discussion. And I will start right off.
There's discussion about, or the way that we're framing this is that the district has needs and the city has needs. And my argument is the city has absolutely no needs. Okay? Who has the need is the people that are out there that think that if there was something to happen, that we are going to be ready to take care of them. And they're the ones that'll be impacted, not the city in any way. A bit of a caveat on that is we have to fix some things. If we're not going to do anything, we need to fix it, over at the police station. But as long as there's not a seismic event, and we do live in the highest ranking as far as the seismic event, and I'm not talking about the big one, I'm talking about something maybe in the 6.0, then we will be in a position that we will be able to do nothing for people for 2 weeks. We should be able to, and people expect that there will be operations, coming forward, but it will not happen. So that to me is why we need the new city hall. It needs to be out of the tsunami zone. And it needs to be category 4 so that we can get right to work, taking care of people when that happens. The rest of the time, if they live in the city hall, you guarantee that there's not going to be a 6.0 event for the next 20 years. We can stay in this hotel, we'll stay right here for 20 years. But we will not be able to take care of people when that happens. The other thing, as far as the information, and I guess I'm challenging the council on this, is that we're talking about blue ribbon committees. And we talk about, we have what, 8 or 10 people, and it's the same 8 or 10 people that are on this line. And we'll go ahead and we'll bring people in. They will not be able, I don't believe that they could get a better answer than what you folks can, because you've been dealing with it for so long. And so when we're talking about the time for Blue Ribbon Committee and the politics and all that, again, I've given the leadership speech that y'all were elected to go ahead and make decisions and do these things. But we could get to where we're talking about in a 2.5 hour meeting. We could cover the size of the city hall, which would address the cost, all the contingencies, everything. We could go through that. And I think that the funding side would be 20 minutes at the outside, because there's really not a whole lot of new things to do. So we can move forward when we're having a discussion. It's not the same kind of an immediate operational cost as what the fire district has. But if something happens bad, then we are going to be like South Florida with, I forgot which one of the hurricanes it was, in Katrina, because we will not be able to do anything from a communication standpoint. It'll take 2 weeks for us to get ourselves on our feet. In the meantime, people are not getting help from us. And this also goes for I was talking to Chief, is that, with my experience with EOCs, you track injuries, you track building failures, all those kind of things. And there's somebody that's going ahead and tracking it. And if somebody gets checked, it goes ahead and comes off the list, all that. If from our EOC, if they become an ESF that's in there, or emergency service function, they don't have to do that. We don't have the redundancy of, well, that's a building that went down and maybe there's a person in it, so there's 2 separate lists. That's the kind of efficiency that we can go ahead and pull together. And if he has some needs, we can get on the phone and be calling people to have them come in, as opposed to being separated. So I think that we can figure out what needs to be done. I think that y'all are very well qualified to do that. And I think we need, in my mind, we need to focus on what is it we're trying to solve. And it's not a new city hall or a nicer city hall at all. It is about taking care of people if something bad happens, which we are not ready to do.
I agree with you 100%. I think we are all in agreement with those comments. The issue that I see is that the residents are not aware of those, even though we hammer it out as much as we can. Awareness is maybe not the right term. There is a strong sense that City Hall doesn't need to be changed. If it fails, fine. There is that sense out there. It's not, but it is probably more prevalent than we would hope. The EOC aspect of a city hall is a major educational leap for a lot of folks. They don't see that as how it works. So that's another educational thing that we need to really work on. The other one is the assumption, as far as the Blue Ribbon Committee, there is an assumption, Jim even said it, and Jim's a fairly intelligent person. He said there's assumption that we're doing things behind doors in a hurry. We know we're not doing that.
Mhm.
We've got everything on record. We've been at this for years. It just seems now that it's snowballing. It is. We're doing more talking about it. So all the Blue Ribbon Committee really does is gives us that connection, hopefully, between more of the public.
I suspect the addition of more of the public would be those 5 members of the committee.
I agree with that, but you know,
I don't know how,
yeah, the other.
I don't know what we
other
get
thing I
with that.
Think of, similar to a Blue Ribbon Committee, is some sort of forum where we invite people and offer them goodies and say, okay, here we do this.
just like we do now.
But it's, you know, we're falling into the same problem that we're right at the tail end of a pandemic when everybody thought we were shut down and nobody is allowed to come here and can't listen to what we're doing. There's still a lot of folks out there that think that. Most of those don't have the ability to Zoom. So I'm just saying that we've got a hurdle to get over if we try and move forward. And I have no problem with moving forward to bring all this information out. It's going to be an effort. And when we get to the point after August, when we put the 13th, when we put the text on, staff has to be very careful with what they say, and it's on us. If we wanted to, we could hire a marketing firm to really push our message out. But that would, I think, in this community, sound very fishy. So that's just a little bit more support to me for a Blue Ribbon Committee. Yes, it's a pain to find folks in the middle of summer and organize meetings and try and get this all done quickly. Or relative.
I don't know if there are that many people attend.
I think.
Yeah, they don't attend this, and why are they gonna attend a Blue Ribbon Committee?
Well, because they'll be invited to be as a member. And I think we're going to get some new faces. I would hope Patrick Nofield would be one of those faces. I also think Jim should be. And those aren't our normal people that we have.
We had a Blue Ribbon Committee for the City Hall, and the Blue Ribbon Committee affirmed the fact that we needed a new City Hall. And so far, that hasn't changed anything. What makes us think that the Blue Ribbon Committee for the food and beverage tax would change anything? I mean, what are we afraid of? Why are we afraid to support a food tax that would help fund some things that we need to have done in the city and not raise property taxes? What is it we're afraid of doing? This is our job to make a decision.
I agree. I don't understand that a Blue Ribbon Committee is just another excuse to put something off.
Jennifer?
And then we'll have then they'll come up, well, we need to have another meeting, and it just goes on and on and on. And we've been buried in this for a long time. New voices, new eyes come in, and you expect them to do a better job, a more thorough job, come up with a better understanding and better ideas than we can. I don't get it. I think it's a way of just passing the buck and being afraid to take the blame, take the heat, that Mark is also feeling, when there's something that needs to be done and we see the need. We were elected to represent the people and take care of this town. And now to turn our back, say, well, we don't really know. What do you guys think? You know,
Well, we have a different perception of why we're here. I have a perception of the public voting for me to listen to them. And you feel that you should, well, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. You've already said it. But I do feel that the public should have a vote and should also have an opportunity to have a blue ribbon committee.
Well, they have a blue ribbon committee with this council and they voted for this council. And they'll get an opportunity to vote for a food and beverage tax. They've had the opportunity to come to many meetings. We hardly get the restaurateurs coming. They're busy. We get their letters. I read the letters, every one of them. So many of them, and the ones that are opposed mostly are restaurant owners, and I understand that. I have a hard time buying all their arguments. I buy some, that makes sense. But again, it's self-serving. And yeah, I feel like I'm representing my constituents also. And I think it's important to look at the safety and health and resilience of this community. Now, maybe they didn't elect me to take care of that. Maybe they elected me just to do what they said in their letters. Well, I get conflicting letters. I have to make that evaluation. I have to look at all the facts. Everything's been presented, including all the letters, even those that are somewhat hateful, and try to make a decision that I think is best for this community. That's why I ran for this. That's why I was on the planning commission. That's why I came here. I wanted to preserve what we have and take care of what we have. And I see this being overrun. Our services are overburdened. And we have one way to take care of that is to raise taxes. So I'm protecting the constituents by proposing a tax on the consumers, the visitors that come here and put the burden on our system, rather than going to the residents that live here and raising their taxes to support the services for the influx of visitors we have. So yeah, I am representing the citizens of this community as I think they want me to represent them. Help keep our costs down, have an efficient government, and provide the services that we need. And maybe they haven't focused on emergency because they feel like, oh, it's never going to happen. Well, it will happen. And when it happens, we'll be blamed. Well, we probably won't be here unless it happens tomorrow. And that we did not prepare this city to take care of an emergency situation, whether it's the earthquakes, the tsunami, a roaring fire that comes through here. If we haven't built the infrastructure to provide those services, then we haven't done our job. And I don't feel like I need to fix people. Very intelligent, well-meaning people come in here and in a couple of meetings, maybe one meeting, tell us that we're doing it wrong, we're doing it right, there's a better way. They can't do that. We spent years trying to understand and come up with the best solution to this. You're not going to do it with a blue ribbon committee coming in and spending a few hours. So it's, to me, it's a waste of time and just another way to kick this can right on down the road.
Did you read, Patrick?
I did, yes, I've read everything.
Okay, the timing of this proposed tax is a concern. Why have not more restaurant owners participated in the scheduled public hearing process? Simply because they perceive this process is contrived and being pushed through without any real dialogue, transparency, and with a predetermined outcome.
I can't help.
And I hear what he's saying, because that's what I've heard from quite a few people.
Do you agree that that's what has been done? This has all been.
I think it's being rushed. I really have felt that. Yes, I've wanted it to slow down, but I'm one of five.
Slow down to what end? What?
I want to have other options considered. I'm not convinced a restaurant tax is the right way to go.
What other options would you like to have considered?
That's why I'd like to have a blue ribbon committee to have some other thoughtful people involved.
Of all the letters I've read, not one of them has suggested anything that we haven't already talked about. Parking, property taxes, and hold off, don't go so fast. In other words, don't put the burden on us to collect the taxes for the city. That's all. I haven't, if, they said there ought to be a better way. I see that in these letters. There ought to be a better, nobody has come up with a better way. Many of our letters say they are in full support of this. When you get those letters, you know right away it's somebody that lives here and owns property here. So Robin, what, you must have some ideas. What are these other?
I'd like the Blue Ribbon Committee and the other people, like Patrick and Jim, to get together on this.
Have any of them suggested a better way in their letters?
Nothing new.
Nothing, I mean,
Nothing
new.
new, but they have not heard the suggestions that have already been made.
Yes, they have. I mean, if they've attended any of the, zoomed in on any of these meetings, Jim's been here twice.
I understand. I understand totally where I'm
Presentation.
coming from. But my sense is that in order to be successful and to to allow people the confidence of what we are doing and what the community is, to understand what's going on, you need more time to get the word out, to educate, to, in some sense, market, and to help everybody understand what's going on. That's why there is a sensibility out there of rush and collusion and, a concern that they're showing that things are being done improperly. And, I think the other thing is Blue Ribbon Committee shouldn't really slow us down. If we're going to go for a November vote, we figured that out already. We could still do it. If something dramatic happens, then we could cut it off. So there is still at least 3 months, maybe 4, that we can do all of this community outreach and still proceed with moving it towards the ballot.
I'm not opposed to Blue Ribbon Committee. I just think it's a waste of time, and I don't know what you're going to charge this committee with. The rest of you can come up with that. Fine with me.
Yes, that is a question. We have to figure out some question to give them to answer. Otherwise, they're just going to do what we do and bat around all over the place.
Exactly.
But at the same time, you've got a community that's aware, hopefully, of not just the 5 of us, but somebody else is looking into this. And hopefully it's somebody they know by name or respect. And I'm sure there's people out there listening to this, but that's really what a Blue Ribbon does.
They'll say we handpicked them, which we will.
Well, the other problem, and on top of that, there is a problem with the Blue Ribbon Committee, because they can be just as one-sided as we are. So literally, I understand asking Patrick and Jim to be on that, but it would be better to not, because
Or
they
to get
have,
a balance.
every time you get a balance, you get the exact same thing. You get 5 and 5 and boom, you got a loggerheads. I don't know, that's really hard to do. How do you find folks that don't already have an opinion? But that's just the challenge of a Blue Ribbon Committee. So I don't know, I just like the idea of the optics of more community involvement.
Well, I'd love to see many more people out here, many more people on the Zoom meeting. We've been saying that ever since we started this. And where are they? They're not showing up. How are you going to do that? How are you going to
If we were to
do
vote,
anything different?
if we were to vote for this thing next meeting,
Well, maybe that's the way to do it.
then we'd have a bazillion people.
Yeah, I still don't know what we're afraid of doing, making it, I mean, we're afraid to make a decision, period. And if we say we're going to make a decision, I think we will have the people on Zooming and coming in, but, you know, they can string it out as long as we can.
So I guess that brings us to a decision. Not that we can make it,
No.
you know, a vote for it tonight, but do we feel like we want to proceed with putting it on the ballot?
Yes.
Because we have a timeline for that.
If you're asking our opinion, yes, I'd like to see it on the ballot.
Same here.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I think there's a consensus for heading in that direction. So if we could then start talking about what is the question? Basically, pretty straightforward. Do we want to have a processed food tax in Cannon Beach?
I mean, prepared food.
Prepared, excuse me, prepared.
Not spam.
But isn't
Yeah.
isn't that what the vote would
Depends on
do?
how it's served.
Pardon me, Mike?
Well, that question would be answered in November with the vote.
That's what I'm asking is what is the question for the ballot?
Oh,
Oh, I thought you were saying what's the question for the blue ribbon?
Before we vote on whether we're going to do this, we probably should have the wording of the question hammered out. So we vote on the wording of the question. So in that sense, I'm asking staff if they would like to start drafting the question. Then from that, we go into defining it. So we have to have, what Emily and Ashley have been working on as far as the ordinance. We need some clarity on that. I think it's really good so far, but we got some parts.
I think that that you folks need to have a discussion about what you want on the ballot. Because if we're talking about a food and beverage tax to be used for who knows what, that's one question. If it's to be used at a 50-50 split between the city and the fire district, and any details that might go within that. And the ballot questions can be limited, I think, to 75 words or something. So we aren't going to be able to say, you know, to include a city hall and a new fire truck or whatever. So there's going to be a limit. But are we saying that we want to have a ballot question for a 5% prepared foods tax to be voted on November 6th and to be split evenly between the fire district and the city? That's probably, you know, about where you're going to get to on 75 words. Everything else is going to be, you know, the narrative that goes with it. But if that's what you're looking at, then I think we're there. If there's some other variations with it, discussions about blue ribbon committees or a different split or, you know, anything like that, we have to know before we put something like that together. Emily, do you have anything you want to pipe in on?
Sure, yeah. So I think a point about the sort of process for getting it on the ballot. I believe that the process would be that the council would pass an ordinance, and then also an ordinance with the code provisions and make clear that it's being referred to the ballot. And then I believe you have to pass a resolution actually referring it to the ballot. So at this point, it might be helpful to talk about what that like the details of the ordinance, but eventually we'll need to have a resolution that passes it to the ballot.
Within that, we need to say, and we find need more guidance, Emily, regarding the type of things that have to be said and some of the things that don't necessarily have to be said, you know, whatever to get. And is it 75 words? versus like 100 words. It doesn't matter, but it's there is a set that you have to go ahead and meet in. And then a lot of people look at that and make sure that it's a valid question or else it gets.
Well, actually, this is more than I expected because what Emily's just mentioning is that we have to have the ordinance hammered out before we resolve to do the ballot.
Right. But the ordinance is going to deal with the kind of questions I'm asking you so that they can go ahead and prepare that.
And I want to make sure that the Blue Ribbon Committee is a piece of this so that if we do take their advice, we can decide not to go forward.
I think that one consideration you might want to give is that if you're going to have a Blue Ribbon Committee, that it is done convening by August 13th. And the reason is there's so many things that if staff is reporting on anything that somebody could construe as advocacy. For example, if we say the money is, I think that the example that Emily used was, yes, the funds can be used for this, but we have to say, but it will cost this. And so it's going to be very hard to provide, for staff to provide data to a committee if we have to be that careful with the information that we provide them with. So I would advocate that we have these meetings with them relatively quickly. Sorry.
Emily, that does start compounding that timeline a lot more. Anything I could think of in lieu of a Blue Ribbon Committee would be to you keep peeking over there. Is hammer out the wording on the ordinance till we're all comfortable with that, and then opening that up to public comment. And do this again with a couple work session, public comment sessions, if we can get more people involved.
I'm not sure I can vote on that.
Okay, I'm just curious because
Just
that would.
want to be clear.
Things like that would be a good way to
Yeah,
get people involved.
I'd go along with that. That would get people involved and it would also keep us along on the timeline and we would know what we're talking about. We'd have some specifics to give to people to make comment on instead of just saying to a Blue Ribbon Committee, well, you decide. I think it would be much better to know what we're talking
Yeah,
about.
it kind of makes sense to me, Sam.
That, the Blue Ribbon Committee effort is valid and important, but also it can compound the problem because it is so specific about what you ask them to do, and the response comes back. Whereas opening it up for more public input with a very specific presentation. So by that time, we would have the wording of the ordinance hammered out. Gives folks better opportunity for public input.
I could hear
Blue
both.
Ribbon Committee does not get public input. It's just 5 or 10 people responding. Whereas they can still respond at public input.
I think with the timeline that you're giving the people, the restaurants can't participate because they're serving dinner now. It's just not, and all through the summer, they're crazy. Busy.
I understand that.
And so I think it's a very difficult time for the group that you're feeling you want to tax to represent themselves.
We're not taxing the restaurants. You keep saying we're taxing the restaurants.
And the other thing is if the restaurants are that concerned, they can find a representative to come present for them.
Well, I know Castaways, they both work at with one other person. There's no way they can get anybody to, one of them to be there. That's just.
That's
an
what I'm saying.
example.
I talked to a restaurateur the other day about the fact, that, hey, you don't have to show up. You have to send somebody who can speak for you. If you can't show up, find somebody that's a friend, a relative, a customer that appreciates.
Attorney.
Send the letters.
Ask Orla to participate in these. They can have somebody do it by Zoom.
Well, yeah, but that becomes a different kind of presentation.
Okay, but but I think
It's valid.
it could represent, I think, it's the same for anybody in the state, what's going on.
Hard to say in the to be applaud what we're doing. So, and I know folks are raising their hands. I'm sorry, but we had our public comment at the beginning. So we'll do it again soon, I'm sure.
And Sam, I think that talking about two different things. One is trying to get an ordinance that people can work from. And that would be an ordinance which would have incorporated some of your decisions. So they start with something. And on another point, I hear that, we're talking about a Blue Ribbon Committee and possibly they can give input to the council and then we can go ahead and develop an ordinance. I understand that process. I understand what Robin's trying to achieve with that, but it just won't happen. I mean, you all have to make some decisions. And if you, as leaders, say, this is what we think, and then people can react to that, as opposed to saying it's a blank slate. And then we'll wait until you give us something and, and that's it. So I'm just trying to get us to where we can get a vote of people. And I'm just pointing out that I see that there are some places that we're kind of setting ourselves up that we won't have the information and we'll say, well, we can't do it. It's like, you all need to make some decisions, in my opinion.
One through, like Sam's suggestion. It worked.
Either way, we need to take what Ashley and Emily have given us as far as the ordinance wording and make sure that's where we're headed and probably should have another meeting just on that. That makes sense for everybody?
Yeah.
Excuse me, I just wanted to point out one more thing about timing. I lost audio for a minute there, so I'm not sure if this came up, but the ordinance cannot be an emergency ordinance. So the council will have to have the first reading and then wait 30 days for it to go into effect. So I think that in order to meet the August 13th deadline, and I can double check this, I think that the council has to first read the ordinance on in the next few weeks. And I'll find out the exact details, but I'm just concerned that the 30 days has to go into effect before the August 13th deadline, which means that it would have to be passed by the council on July 13th or before, I believe. Bruce, does that sound right to you?
Yeah, except that here, if it's unanimous, sometimes they will do 2 readings, in one night. I don't see this being unanimous, so I don't think we'll have that problem. I think that we should figure for a 30-day and knowing that, you're backing up to July 13th.
July 13th for the first reading?
Yes.
But that means
Reading.
7 day for notice of the,
I think the 7-day notice is if they do it twice by title. Is that correct, Emily?
I'm sorry, I'm not so familiar with the council rules, but I will find out and email and let everyone know by tomorrow.
I'm just saying for posting of them.
For
I
posting.
think you only have to have it posted for 7 days if you're doing it twice by title only that same night. And that only works if it's unanimous.
That's right.
And if it's not unanimous, then yeah. But you're right, if we do it on July 13th, if we have to post it for 7 days, that would be July 6th, that it needs to be posted,
Which is our next meeting.
which is our next meeting.
Damn, that happened fast. See, that's what people are upset about.
Well, yes, but we've known this for a very long time.
We have.
I know, but we could have been ready for this and we didn't do a lot for a long time. And so now we find ourselves up against the wall. So it's not that we have been, hiding anything or anything like that. We've got to get our act together.
And the ordinance that we would be looking at would be the prepared food ordinance. It would not be an ordinance that says that we are going to go to an election for this. That would be the resolution, right?
That's an Emily question. Did you hear the question, Emily?
Yeah, I did hear the question. I am just going to have to look into all of this. I've never done a resolution referring it to the voters, so I'm not exactly sure the process. Like I said, I'll look into it and I can email you tomorrow with exactly what that is.
I think it does refer to the fact that it's going to election, or just say somewhere in it that it is going to election. Other than that,
But it wouldn't be,
It's just a-
but it would still be the food or prepared food ordinance that we've looked at before. Okay.
Yeah.
Just with the caveat that we're referring it to the voters.
Can I remind you that is online?
Yeah, it is online, so people can look at it now if they want to.
and I guess my only concern was if there was any tweaks,
Yeah, but
bagels and stuff like that we had. And I think we've talked about it twice now. I can't remember where we finished.
Would you like, I think somebody had said a dedicated meeting. Would you like us to set a meeting up for July 7th? We got a pretty full agenda, I think.
The July agenda so far is kind of light-ish. Prepared food tax update we put on every meeting. The scope for the Canopy Beach Elementary RFQ, a special event fee resolution, and the role of the Parks Committee. So far,
That wouldn't be that long, but it would be
that's for the first. So compared to lately, it's kind of light.
the first,
Or July 6th, the first meeting.
Yeah.
July 6th. That's why I'm suggesting the 7th. And I think that we would, an hour and a half. So if we can go a little bit later, not now, but if we try to do it on the 6th, and it probably is a good idea to try to do it on the 6th, because we can continue the meeting, that sort of thing, to work our way to the 13th. But, so we can add it as a discussion item to the agenda,
so are you talking about the 6th or the 7th?
the 6th.
Because you were just talking about the
Yeah.
7th.
I did, and then Jen reminded me that right now the 6th is not that heavy,
Oh, it's not.
and so we can go ahead and put it on that. Now, it always changes, but we can put it on that meeting, have the discussion, public will know that we're having that discussion. It's online, as somebody had said. And then we just have to commit to getting it, whatever decisions need to be made. I think we need to be careful with counting all the days and all those kind of things, counting back to make sure we get the right notice in the right times and those kind of things.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, that's any more? Any more we want to talk about on this topic right now? The only thing I could think of is go back and look at the ordinance again. And if there's anything glaring, let's let Ashley know or Emily know ahead of time. We're not blindsided during the discussion by something, oh my God, we got to change all this. I don't want it to become a discussion on emails, but let Ashley know that there are concerns or there are ideas that you want to present. Okay. Okay, well, let's move on then.
That was easy.
Discussion. Jeff, what you got?
Want me to go ahead? Okay. Mayor, council, thank you. And I appreciate the difficulty, not in what just happened, but in difficulty in getting public involvement and getting the word out. It's always a challenge. And in today's environment, even more so. And I also wanted to thank the mayor for bringing up beachtsp.com before I get in the code audit, because get your surveys in. That's your best way to get involved with transportation, traffic, parking, safety, bike trails, hiking trails, whatever you want to move around this community. That's your avenue for having your opinion heard. And that survey is open at least to the 25th, where if we see people just flooding in over the last few days, we'll keep it open as long as we possibly can, because we're at a listening stage. We want some input. So I'm going to move on to the topic at hand, which is a code audit update. We've come before you and got the go ahead to move forward with the code audit. I've given you all the printed materials because I heard that the iPads kind of give you the harder way to read this, but this is for Herbworks, the consultant that we selected, and we've had conversations with Herbworks this past week, and we're discussing the scope of work, timeline, and budget for this as we move forward, and we want to get the contract fully signed and move forward on this. And on that note, we were really planning on bringing this to you next month, but we sense there's an urgency. There's an kind of a at least need out there, or in both DRB, the Planning Commission, the City Council over the last 6 months. I've heard a very distinct interest in we don't want any more combining of lots. We don't want to keep seeing the max out of floor area ratio and lot coverage. Is there something we can do about that? So we've had discussions with them after this application came in and we went through the interview process and everything, of possibly a two-track approach, so that we might put the urgent issues of what I just spoke about forward into an immediate ordinance change, with the track one kind of approach on that, start moving that through as soon as possible. Whereas we'd have the process to go through the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinances and making sure they align with a full approach that takes the general 8 to a 12-month time period. And so we wanted to bring this to you. We wanted to then bring it before the Planning Commission, the DRB, and get their sense if this approach works with you. And if that does work, we will get that first track going immediately. That's why I'm here. That's why we brought this forward. I didn't expect you to read all the application materials or anything. This was just to give you a sense of this is what we had originally thought we were going to do. And then getting feedback through this process. And since we started this, months ago, we've heard and we're feeling this urgency, and we thought, hey, this might be a better solution. And that way, it's a quasi type of moratorium to deal with those two issues. But what this does is then it allows you the 8 or 10, 12 months that if you feel there's other methods of doing this, other approaches of solving those two things after seeing the full thing laid out, you get a second shot at it when you come back to it. So if that's seems the correct approach to you, I just wanted to get your feedback on that.
I'm glad to hear that. I was concerned about the timing that was laid out here. It's taking way too long to get to some of those urgent issues. So
yeah. And we built the timeline and around those work sessions, the joint work sessions with all three. And yet to do that and to truly vet everything, it's going to take that time period. Yet we know that we need to really do that. I've already drafted 3 different alternatives to get that track 1 done, some language alternatives. So we're ready to go immediately if you want to feel that's the correct pathway.
So Jeff, you have this project scope schedule. Can you go through the timelines here? Is it kickoff meeting? Is that here?
No. And so I can go through kind of the amended one that we're working on with them now. That's what you have in your packet is what was turned in by them during the interview process as their proposal. And so we have had discussions, 2 discussions with them and going back and forth on this kind of 2-track approach now. And so I can give you kind of what that timeline would be up to, say, September 1st, at least penciled in right now. And
If I can, Robin, because the schedule looked like it was going to take so long and the important things were going to get done at the end, we said, let's go ahead and staff identify, these are some of the things we're hearing about. So let's get a track for them. And then we continue on for anything else that the group wants to look at. Or if you don't like the things that we've talked about looking at first, we just waive them. But we didn't want to have the critical things that are kind of happening now that we're hearing about wait until the end of a process.
Do you have the schedule here in here somewhere?
yeah, so if you,
It's not in that one.
Is it this one?
yeah,
And where,
that is on page 3 of this one.
Yeah, that's what I was
Okay.
wondering
So
about.
I can kind of get to what we've penciled in for up until September 1st. This takes into account what I just spoke about, where we would go to and I'm calling them pre-kickoff events, which is tonight with you guys, the Planning Commission tomorrow night, the DRB. We're hoping to schedule a special called session on the 29th, June 29th, or that week, around that week. Then we would have what's scoped under here as the kickoff meeting on July 6th. Now that's at a project management level. What you're interested in, I think, Robin, is kind of that first work session between the DRB Planning Commission and City Council. That would be in August. Currently, I have it just penciled in as August 12th. But before that, we would be doing what I'm calling the Track 1 language review, and that's July 8th. Track 1 language would be posted on July 15th. Then there would be what is in this form as the PMT workshop is July 20th. The Track 1 Planning Commission work session would be July 22nd. Draft CDO audit that's in here would be August 5th. And like I said, the August 12th would be that first work session. What's called the CAC debrief is August 12th. Track 1 public hearing for the Planning Commission is August 26th. And then the final CDO audit would be presented on September 1st. And then it just goes on from there with the Track 1 council work session targeted for September 14th. So you guys would get that first initial ordinance changes in September and hopefully finalize that in October. If that seems,
Could you send that
Yeah,
out?
and those dates.
I will, if it's okay, I'd like to, we're hopefully having this to the consultants this, tomorrow, if Bruce gets a chance to sign off on it, we'll get back from them and then we'll, as soon as we finalize it with them, we'll get it to you. But if that sounds like the approach, that's what we'd like to run with. And
So how
we finish it,
the approach? I agree.
Before we were to sign off on a contract, we wanted to make sure you were okay with accelerating some elements.
Definitely.
we have to get Jen's approval first on those dates. Those dates, I did those in my napkin without Jen's approval, so.
So the only two issues at this point with the priority or the floor area ratio and the combining of lots?
Combining lots and then kind of the maxing out of footprints. So that's what we're looking at right now as
Nothing else.
right. We weren't going to get into all the other.
I think that if there are issues that y'all want to put on that list, we can do it. It'll change the schedule some. Those were the two that we were pretty certain you wanted to address.
Yeah.
If
And
there's anything,
Well, those both sound important. Yeah.
And that's what, like Bruce said, it'll go through the typical public process. It has to go, those ordinance changes have to go to the planning commission and then you guys. And so there are opportunities along the way for, like you said, if something else is pressing or something else you see is missing, then we bring that in
Is the plan development going to be part of that?
Yeah.
Track?
to just get rid of the plan development. I can do that.
Yeah.
I think that should be number 3.
That's an easy strike.
Do.
I thought that's where we're headed. Okay.
You'd like to prioritize that up for 3 to 1?
Oh, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, since that's easy.
I can make a motion. Yeah.
It's-
that's kind of what we want.
Let's see something like the maximizing the square footage to kind of expand out into some other little mini topics within that discussion. So that one could be elaborate.
That's why we want to get it started.
Yeah.
Right, any of these can go.
Because everything I can think of that I'd like to change seems to fit in that zone.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for thinking about that.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Thank you for filling the rest of my summer.
Right.
I didn't know what I was going to do.
Mike asked to schedule meetings around his vacation.
Boy.
So anybody have anything for good of the order? Chris?
Item, remember, July 10th at Nakus, the delivering or the ceremony around the stones. And I think you all received something, but remember that was an RSVP email, so make sure you RSVP. And Philomena is donating chairs and tables.
Don't know.
Did we get that? What was, you have the heading on that?
We did.
Oh,
I think I vaguely remember something.
Yeah, but we can resend, but
I thought it was, is that an absolute certain date? I thought it was still a possibility that was.
No, that was, I believe, the absolute.
Firm for July 10th.
Yes. Yeah.
I think you got one before that said around these dates, but now this is it.
Okay.
That's all I have, sir.
And we just got that yesterday, I think.
Jennifer, it says MZ, whose dedication, why?
I sent it on Tuesday morning.
Okay, yeah.
I'll re-forward it real quick, just so it pops up in the copy of your email.
Just for information, our coffee with the counselors this week, most of the talk was the food and beverage tax. Amazing, isn't it? And then somebody wanted to talk about the parking signs, the no parking signs that people are putting on their properties, and whether or not that's legal. And in terms of putting signs on the properties, and I don't know if we have anything from the code enforcement.
Not yet.
Okay, so we need to find out just what kind of signs you can put on your property and what they need to look like. And let's see what else. Oh, and the city hall location. There were a couple of people, 2 or 3 people from
3.
Well, but then I think the third person that came in very late, she was also speaking against. So 3 people out of 12, I think, spoke specifically about the city hall location potential at the RV park. They were against it because they live in the area. They have young children. It's a community that residential mostly, and they didn't want to see the city hall. And
it was a lot to do with the road that was going to be used.
Yeah.
And we sort of segued into, well, if there was another approach, they might be a little bit more for it.
yeah. And that, for anybody who's zooming in and hasn't participated in that coffee with the counselors, it is on, it was recorded, right?
Mhm.
And so it is on the city website if you want to watch that.
Okay. Last chance. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.